Hi guys, this is Cozy Book Babe. We're back with Chapter 3 of The Assassin and the Healer from The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. Chapter 3. Gods. Oh gods. Irene's breath came quickly as the girl stepped closer to the two remaining attackers. The first mercenary barked a laugh, but the one by the door was wide-eyed. Irene carefully, so carefully, backed away. "You killed my men?" the mercenary said, blade held aloft. The young woman flipped one of her daggers into a new position, the kind of position that Irene thought would easily allow the blade to go straight up through the ribs and into the heart. "Let's just say your men got what was coming to them." The mercenary lunged, but the girl was waiting. Irene knew she should run and not look back. But the girl was only armed with 2 daggers, and the mercenary was enormous, and it was over before it really started. The mercenary got in 2 hits, both met with those wicked-looking daggers, and then she knocked him out cold with a swift blow to the head. So fast, unspeakably fast and graceful, a wraith moving through the mist. He crumpled into the fog and out of sight, and Irene didn't listen too hard as the girl followed where he'd fallen. Irene whipped her head to the mercenary in the doorway, preparing to shout a warning to her savior, but the man was already sprinting down the alley as fast as his feet could carry him. Irene had half a mind to do that herself when the stranger emerged from the mist, blades clean but still out, still ready. "Please don't kill me," Irene whispered. She was ready to beg, to offer everything in exchange for her useless, wasted life. But the young woman just laughed under her breath and said, "What would have been the point in saving you, then?" Selena hadn't meant to save the barmaid. It had been sheer luck that she'd spotted the 4 mercenaries creeping about the streets. Sheer luck that they seemed as eager for trouble as she was. She had hunted them into that alley, where she found them ready to hurt that girl in unforgivable ways. The fight was over too quickly to really be enjoyable, or be a balm to her temper, if you could even call it a fight. The 4th one had gotten away, but she didn't feel like chasing him. Not as the servant girl stood in front of her, shaking from head to toe. Selena had a feeling that hurling a dagger after the sprinting man would only make the girl start screaming. Or faint, which would complicate things. But the girl didn't scream or faint. She just pointed a trembling finger at Selena's arm. You're bleeding." Selena frowned down at the little shining spot on her bicep. "I suppose I am." A careless mistake. The thickness of her tunic had stopped it from being a troublesome wound, but she'd have to clean it. It would be healed in a week or less. She made to turn back to the street to see what else she could find to amuse her, but the girl spoke again. I could bind it up for you." She wanted to shake the girl. Shake her for about 10 different reasons. The first, and biggest, was because she was trembling and scared and had been utterly useless. The second was for being stupid enough to stand in that alley in the middle of the night. She didn't feel like thinking about all of the other reasons, not when she was already angry enough. "I can bind myself up just fine," Selena said, heading for the door that led into the White Pig's kitchen. Days ago, she'd scoped out the inn and its surrounding buildings, and now could navigate them blindfolded. "Silba knows what was on that blade," the girl said, and Selena paused, invoking the goddess of healing. Very few did that these days, unless they were... My mother was a healer, and she taught me a few things," the girl stammered. I could... Please let me repay the debt I owe you." "You wouldn't owe me anything if you'd used some common sense." The girl flinched as though Selena had struck her. It only annoyed her even more. Everything annoyed her. This town, this kingdom, this cursed world. "I'm sorry," the girl said softly. "What are you apologizing to me for? Why are you apologizing at all? Those men had it coming, but you should have been smarter on a night like this, when I'd bet all my money that you could taste the aggression in that filthy damn tap room." It wasn't the girl's fault, she had to remind herself. Not her fault at all that she didn't know how to fight back. The girl put her face in her hands, her shoulders curving inward. Selena counted down the seconds until the girl burst into sobs. until she fell apart. But the tears didn't come. The girl just took a few deep breaths, then lowered her hands. "Let me clean your arm," she said in a voice that was different somehow, stronger, clearer, "or you'll wind up losing it." And the slight change in the girl was interesting enough that Selena followed her inside. She didn't bother about the 3 bodies in the alley. She had a feeling no one but the rats and carrion feeders would care about them in this town. Chapter 4. Irene brought the girl to her room under the stairs because she was half afraid that the mercenary who'd gotten away would be waiting for them upstairs, and Irene didn't want to see any more fighting or killing or bleeding, strong stomach or no. Not to mention she was also half afraid to be locked in the suite with the stranger. She left the girl sitting on her sagging bed and went to fetch 2 bowls of water and some clean bandages. Supplies that would be taken out of her paycheck when Nolan realized they were gone. It didn't matter, though. The stranger had saved her life. This was the least she could do. When Irene returned, she almost dropped the steaming bowls. The girl had removed her hood and cloak and tunic. Irene didn't know what to remark on first. That the girl was young, perhaps 2 or 3 years younger than Irene, but felt old. That the girl was beautiful, with golden hair and blue eyes that shone in the candlelight, or that the girl's face would have been even more beautiful had it not been covered in a patchwork of bruises. Such horrible bruises, including a black eye that had undoubtedly been swollen shut at some point. The girl was staring at her, quiet and still as a cat. It wasn't Irene's place to ask questions, especially not when this girl had dispatched 3 mercenaries in a matter of moments. Even if the gods had abandoned her, Irene still believed in them. They were still somewhere, still watching. She believed because how else could she explain being saved just now? And the thought of being alone, truly alone, was almost too much to bear, even when so much of her life had gone astray. The water sloshed in the bowls as Irene set them down on the tiny table beside her bed, trying to keep her hands from trembling too much. The girl said nothing while Irene inspected the cut on her bicep. Her arm was slender, but rock hard with muscle. The girl had scars everywhere, small ones, big ones. She offered no explanation for them, and it seemed to Irene that the girl wore her scars the way some women wore their finest jewelry. The stranger couldn't have been older than 17 or 18, but Adarlan had made them all grow up fast, too fast. Irene set about washing the wound, and the girl hissed softly. "Sorry," Irene said quickly. "I put some herbs in there as an antiseptic. I should have warned you." Irene kept a stash of them with her at all times, along with other herbs her mother had taught her about, just in case. Even now, Irene couldn't turn away from a sick beggar in the street, and often walked toward the sound of coughing. "Believe me, I've been through worse." "I do," Irene said. "Believe you, I mean." Those scars in her mangled face spoke volumes, and explained the hood. But was it vanity or self-preservation that made her wear it? "What's your name?" "It's none of your concern, and it doesn't matter." Irene bit her tongue. Of course it was none of her business. The girl hadn't given a name to Nolan either. So she was traveling on some secret business then. "My name is Irene," she offered. "Irene Towers." A distant nod. Of course the girl didn't care either. Then the stranger said, "What's the daughter of a healer doing in this piece of shit town?" No kindness, no pity. Just blunt, if not almost bored, curiosity. "I was on my way to Antica to join their healers' academy and ran out of money." She dipped the rag into the water, wrung it out, and resumed cleaning the shallow wound. "I got work here to pay for the passage over the ocean, and, well, I never left. I guess staying here became easier, simpler." A snort. "This place? It's certainly simple, but easy. I think I'd rather starve in the streets of Antica than live here." Irene's face warmed. She didn't have an excuse. The girl's eyes flashed to hers. They were ringed with gold, stunning. Even with the bruises, the girl was alluring, like wildfire or a summer storm swept in off the Gulf of Oro. "Let me give you a bit of advice," the girl said bitterly. from one working girl to another. Life isn't easy, no matter where you are. You'll make choices you think are right and then suffer for them. Those remarkable eyes flickered. So if you're going to be miserable, you might as well go to Anaga and be miserable in the shadow of the Torres Esme. Educated and possibly extremely well-traveled then, if the girl knew the Healer's Academy by name, and she pronounced it perfectly. Irene shrugged, not daring to voice her dozens of questions. Instead, she said, "I don't have the money to go now anyway." It came out sharper than she intended. Sharper than was smart, considering how lethal this girl was. Irene didn't try to guess what manner of working girl she might be. Mercenary was about as dark as she'd let herself imagine. "Then steal the money and go. Your boss deserves to have his purse lightened." Irene pulled back. "I'm no thief." A roguish grin. "If you want something, then go take it." This girl wasn't like Wildfire. She was Wildfire. Deadly and uncontrollable, and slightly out of her wits. More than enough people believe that these days, Irene ventured to say. Like a Darlin, like those mercenaries. I don't need to be one of them. The girl's grin faded. So you'd rather rot away here with a clean conscience? Irene didn't have a reply, so she didn't say anything as she set down the rag and bowl and pulled out a small tin of salve. She kept it for herself for the nicks and scrapes she got while working, but this cut was small enough that she could spare a bit. As gently as she could, she smeared it onto the wound. The girl didn't flinch this time. After a moment, the girl asked, "When did you lose your mother?" "Over 8 years ago." Irene kept her focus on the wound. That was a hard time to be a gifted healer on this continent, especially in Fenharrow. The king of Adarlan didn't leave much of its people, or royal family, alive. Irene looked up. The wildfire in the girl's eyes had turned into a scorching blue flame. Such rage, she thought with a shiver. Such simmering rage. What had she been through to make her look like that? She didn't ask, of course, and she didn't ask how the young woman knew where she was from. Irene understood that her golden skin and brown hair were probably enough to mark her as being from Fenharrow, if her slight accent didn't give her away. "If you manage to attend the Torres Esme," the girl said, her anger shifting as if she had shoved it down deep inside her, "what would you do afterward?" Irene picked up one of the fresh bandages and began wrapping it around the girl's arm. She dreamed about it for years, contemplated 1,000 different futures while she washed dirty mugs and swept the floors. "I'd come back. Not to here, I mean, but to the continent. Go back to Fenharrow. There are a lot of people who need good healers these days." She said the last part quietly. For all she knew, the girl might support the king of Adarlan, might report her to the small town guard for just speaking ill of the king. Irene had seen it happen before, far too many times. But the girl looked toward the door with its makeshift bolt that Irene had constructed, at the closet that she called her bedroom, at the threadbare cloak draped over the half-rotted chair against the opposite wall, then finally back at her. It gave Irene a chance to study her face, seeing how easily she'd trounced those mercenaries. Whoever had harmed her must be fearsome indeed. "You'd really come back to this continent, to the Empire?" There was such quiet surprise in her voice that Irene met her eyes. "It's the right thing to do," was all Irene could think of to say. The girl didn't reply, and Irene continued wrapping her arm. When she was finished, the girl shrugged on her shirt and tunic, tested her arm, and stood. In the cramped bedroom, Irene felt so much smaller than the stranger, even if there were only a few inches difference between them. The girl picked up her cloak, but didn't don it as she took a step toward the closed door. "I could find something for your face," Irene blurted. The girl paused with a hand on the doorknob and looked over her shoulder. "These are meant to be a reminder." For what? Or to whom? She shouldn't pry. Shouldn't have even asked. She smiled bitterly. "For me." Irene thought of the scars she'd seen on her body and wondered if those were all reminders too. The young woman turned back to the door, but stopped again. "Whether you stay or go to Antica and attend the Torres Esme, and return to save the world," she mused, "you should probably learn a thing or two about defending yourself." Irene eyed the daggers at the girl's waist, the sword she hadn't even needed to draw. Jewels embedded in the hilt, real jewels, glinted in the candlelight. The girl had to be fabulously wealthy, richer than Irene could ever conceive of being. I can't afford weapons. The girl huffed a laugh. If you learn these maneuvers, you won't need them. Selena took the barmaid into the alley, if only because she didn't want to wake the other inn guests and get into yet another fight. She didn't really know why she'd offered to teach her to defend herself. The last time she'd helped anybody, it had just turned around to beat the hell out of her. Literally. But the barmaid, Irene, had looked so earnest when she talked about helping people, about being a healer. The Torres Esme, any healers worth their salt, knew about the academy in Antica, where the best and brightest, no matter their station, could study. Selena had once dreamed of dwelling in the fabled cream-colored towers of the Torre, of walking the narrow sloping streets of Antica and seeing wonders brought in from lands she'd never heard of. But that was a lifetime ago, a different person ago. Not now, certainly, and if Irene stayed in this God's-forsaken town, other people were bound to try to attack her again. So here Selena was, cursing her own conscience for a fool as they stood in the misty alley behind the inn. The bodies of the 3 mercenaries were still out there, and Selena caught Irene cringing at the sound of scurrying feet and soft squeaking. The rats hadn't wasted any time. Selena gripped the girl's wrist and held up her hand. People, men, usually don't hunt for women who look like they'll put up a fight. They'll pick you because you look off guard or vulnerable or like you'd be sympathetic. They'll usually try to move you to another location where they won't need to worry about being interrupted. Irene's eyes were wide, her face pale in the light of the torch Selena had dropped just outside the back door. Helpless. What was it like to be helpless to defend yourself? A shudder that had nothing to do with the rats gnawing on the dead mercenaries went through her. Do not let them move you to another location, Selena continued, reciting from the lessons that Ben, Arobyn's second, had once taught her. She'd learned self-defense before she'd ever learned to attack anyone, and to first fight without weapons, too. Fight back enough to convince them that you're not worth it, and make as much noise as you can. In a shithole like this, though, I bet no one will bother coming to help you. But you should still start screaming your head off about a fire. Not rape, not theft, not something that cowards would rather hide from. And if shouting doesn't encourage them, then there are a few tricks to outsmart them. Some might make them drop like a stone. Some might get them down temporarily. But as soon as they let go of you, your biggest priority is getting the hell away. You understand? They let you go, you run. Irene nodded, still wide-eyed. She remained that way as Selena took the hand she'd lifted and walked her through the eye gouge, showing her how to shove her thumbs into the corner of someone's eye, crook her thumbs back behind the eyeballs, and, well, Selena couldn't actually finish that part, since she liked her own eyeballs very much, but Irene grasped it after a few times and did it perfectly when Selena grabbed her from behind again and again. She then showed her the ear clap, then how to pinch the inside of a man's upper thigh hard enough to make him scream, where to stomp on the most delicate part of the foot, what soft spots were the best to hit with her elbow. Irene actually hit her so hard in the throat that Selena gagged for a good minute, and then told her to go for the groin. Always try to go for a strike to the groin. And when the moon was setting, when Selena was convinced that Irene might stand a chance against an assailant, they finally stopped. Irene seemed to be holding herself a bit taller, her face flushed. If they come after you for money, Selena said, jerking her chin toward where the mercenaries lay in a heap, throw whatever coins you have far away from you and run in the opposite direction. Usually, they'll be so occupied by chasing after your money that you'll have a good chance of escape. Irene nodded. I should teach all this to Jessa. Selene didn't know or care who Jessa was, but she said, if you get the chance, teach it to any female who will take the time to listen. Silence fell between them. There was so much more to learn, so much else to teach her. But dawn was about 2 hours away, and she should probably go back to her room now, if only to pack and go. Go, not because she was ordered to, or because she found her punishment acceptable, but because she needed to. She needed to go to the Red Desert, even if it was only to see where the Wyrd planned to lead her. Staying, running away to another land, avoiding her fate, she wouldn't do that. She couldn't be like Irene, a living reminder of loss and shoved aside dreams. No, she'd continue to the Red Desert and follow this path wherever it led, however much it stung her pride. Irene cleared her throat. Did you ever have to use these maneuvers? Not to pry. I mean, you don't have to answer if... I've used them, yes, but not because I was in that kind of situation. She knew she shouldn't say it, but she did. I'm usually the one who does the hunting. Irene, to her surprise, just nodded, if a bit sadly. There was such irony, she realized, in them working together. The assassin and the healer, two opposite sides of the coin. Irene wrapped her arms around herself. How can I ever repay you for... But Selena held up a hand. The alley was empty, but she could feel them, could hear the shift in the fog, in the scurrying of the rats. Pockets of quiet. She met Irene's stare and flicked her eyes toward the back door, a silent command. Irene had gone white and stiff. It was one thing to practice, but to put lessons into action, to use them, Irene was more of a liability. Selena jerked her chin at the door, an order now. There were at least 5 men, 2 on either end of the alley converging upon them, and 1 more standing guard by the busier end of the street. Irene was through the back door by the time Selena drew her sword. Okay guys, that's the end of chapter 4 of The Assassin and the Healer in The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. Thank you for listening.